Well, it's 1 o'clock on a Saturday, and I'm here with my longtime friend, Marty Brown. Welcome, Marty Brown, to Al's Place.
Thank you, Al. I appreciate the friendship over the decades, and also if you had me on the show for, I don't know, maybe this is the fifth time or not, but first
Yeah, the
time
last time we talked about Elvis.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Many times, you know.
Yeah, we've done, I think, maybe 3 or 4. You could probably look back in the logs and see on Elvis, but this will be the first one on James Dean.
Right, right. Well, today we're going to do James Dean, of course, and he's always been an actor that's been looked at quite a bit over the years, and you've been a big fan. You've been a big fan of his for a long time.
Yeah, ever since I was a kid. My first memories of James Dean was on Happy Days. When Happy Days, if whoever's familiar with the show,
right.
the first, I think, year or two, Fonzie lived over the garage of the Cunninghams, and he had this little thing would open up, which was like his closet.
Right.
And it was wood and it had a door on it. He'd always comb his hair and then go, hey, you know, like he had the perfect hair.
Right.
And then there was this picture of this guy, a close-up, and he'd always act like he was hitting him on the chin. You know, it was camaraderie. And I remember asking my dad, I said, who's that? And he goes, that's James Dean. And I was like, so that was it. But the first time that he affected me with his acting and his coolness and just, I guess, charisma was in 77. I think it was a TV movie of the week. And they ran Rebel Without a Cause. And I remember just how great I thought the movie was, because I guess by then it was about 22 years old the movie was. And also the way he looked with his hair, his coolness, I mean, even smoking cigarettes, the boots he wore, and of course the iconic red jacket that he had.
Was Rebel Without a Cause the first movie you saw?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the first one, because also that
with James Dean.
Yeah, also that same year I remember seeing West Side Story too, but that's for another podcast. But I'm just kind of fascinated about juvenile delinquent movies from the 50s. They're a bit dated, but the thing I think that Rebel Without a Cause that's so good and lasting is just, I mean, not only as a teenager, but everybody wants to be accepted. You want to be in the cool clique, right, or whatever it is, and that's just a classic tale. It's really for the generations, you know, because even the love story between he and Natalie Wood in the beginning, she's mean to him because, you know, he's a new guy, right, and she's hazing him along with the other, you know, roughnecks of the gang or whatever. And but then of course eventually she falls for him, you know.
Well, I think one of the movies you also like with juvenile delinquents was Blackboard Jungle. Mm-hmm. You know, that was one of your favorites.
Yeah, well, I don't know which was released first, but now the thing about Blackboard Jungle,
I think Blackboard Jungle was the first one,
and that was
first before Rebel.
Yeah, because
James Dean wasn't in that.
Right, he would have been perfect in it, but that had Vic Morrow. Glenn Ford played the teacher, and then Sidney Poitier. He was playing like an 18-year-old. He was already about 30 at the time. But and Jamie Farr, I don't think he's in the credits, but he has a bit role in it. But this is years before he becomes Klinger. But with Blackboard Jungle, that's the very first movie to ever have rock and roll music in it,
right?
With Rock Around the Clock, because I think they said they had maybe a few fights or some, you know, hooliganism. Mm-hmm. At some of the theaters and everything, but probably wasn't as bad as they thought. Like when the papers say, you know, oh, they're burning the place down or not, you know,
right.
with it. But all it does is just make people want to see the movie even more.
Well, James Dean, let's tell, where was he born?
James Dean was born February 8th, 1931 in Marion, Indiana. And then he pretty much settled in where he grew up. Mm-hmm. In Fairmont, Indiana. He moved to California for a little bit, but when his mother passed away when he was about 9 or 10, around that time, his dad was pretty much not a good father, so he ends up shipping him back to Fairmont, Indiana, where his aunt and uncle raised him until, you know, he went off to college and then off to acting school. But
well, what made him, you think, want to get into acting? He's just something he wanted to do, or?
Yeah, I think he was always truly a rebel. I mean, I guess everybody in a way, when you're a teenager growing up, you want to rebel against something. Right. But he actually was a very good athlete, at least in high school, basketball, track. But he just tried out for like a school play and then really realized he had a knack for it. And he studied it very hard, and he was passionate about it.
Right.
So, and I think he may even taken some college courses when he when he went to college. I think it was out in, I don't know if he went to UCLA or not, but I think Martin Landau, the actor from many movies, but also Space 1999, they were either college buddies, maybe they went to college together, but James Dean became more famous than he did. But I think he might have went to UCLA for acting classes. And I don't know if he went to Juilliard, but which of course is a very famous acting college or school, but I do know he studied under a certain person who was like really all the rage then, because if you went and studied under him, you had a pretty good chance of at least having a career, maybe not becoming famous. But I think who he went and studied under, and I'd have to look it up online, I think Marilyn Monroe may have also taken acting lessons from this
James
gentleman.
Dean was more or less a method actor.
Correct.
Just like Marlon Brando was a method actor.
Yeah, probably the first method actor that made it famous was, of course, Marlon Brando. And then James Dean was... Because Marlon Brando, I think it was on the Waterfront that maybe... Either on the Waterfront or Streetcar Named Desire, I forget which one came out first. That's the one that put him on the map.
Came out first, I think, and that's kind of...
Yeah, that's the one I think we said I could have been a contender. And then, of course, hey, Stella! That's from Streetcar Named Desire. Because wasn't Liz Taylor in it, or am I wrong?
Vivian Leigh.
Vivian Leigh, that's who it was, yeah. But, yeah, and I think he did style some of his acting after Marlon Brando, but I think a lot of actors he did take his influences from, because I think some people have said back in the day he was a dime store Brando, or as a ripoff, and I didn't see it that way. I thought he had a tremendous talent, because when he would cry on screen, it looked very believable. It didn't look forced. It didn't look faked or anything like that.
Well, he, you know, James Dean was, you know, he lives on today as much as Elvis does, basically, with the movie files and stuff like that. But he only made really 3 movies.
Correct.
Now, he did some television work.
He did a lot of I think he may, I'm ballparking now, but I think he might have about potentially 50 television credits to his day, because you got to think, when he passed away in 1955, television was only 5 years old. But he did a lot of...
was it Playhouse Theater or something like that?
Yeah, that, and also I think the Kraft...
The Kraft Theater.
Kraft Theater, yeah, because this is several years ago, but they unearthed maybe a kinescope, if I'm saying that right, of one of those shows that they thought was lost with Ronald Reagan, well before he got into politics. And also, I think Reagan was coming into his own, because I think maybe it was the mid to late 50s when he started becoming a big movie star in his own right. But yeah, it's amazing how much actual television work that he did. And speaking of TV, one of his first acting jobs was a commercial for Pepsi Cola, I think in 1951, maybe 52, and he got, I think, $10. But, you know, now, I mean, that might have been a week's worth of groceries back then, too. You know, and you do what you do to, you know, just to make it, and hopefully you do, and he stuck to it. But he also stuck out because he looked, you know, he kind of had like an Elvis quality to him. He was unique looking. Also, he was, his hair, more like in Rebel Without a Cause, but it had that blown dry hair look, which was kind of pre-rock and roll, because rock and roll was still maybe about a year before it really
But he was
huge.
definitely in his own world. I mean, he you know, he didn't mimic anyone. He was himself.
Yeah.
You know.
And they say a lot of his acting, like brooding, he wouldn't smile, because a lot of times they said he was a pretty tortured soul. But when he lost his mom at a very young age due to cancer, they said it devastated him, because it changed him, as it does. I mean, you know, anytime you lose somebody like that at a young age, you can never figure out life. None of us can. But
he never really had a father figure, did he?
No, because his father was a dental hygienist out in California, and he just basically didn't want to live up to his responsibilities. Of course, it would have been different if his mom would have lived, but she was the one that always took care of James Dean, told me loved him. You know, I think whatever music he was into at the time, she always cultivated that too. Not like, well, you need to listen to this, because a lot of people think, you know, their generation's music is the best ever, and I sometimes think that too. But he wasn't like that, and his dad was just pretty much just there, and
Now,
that was
he
it.
didn't have any brothers or sisters, did he?
No,
He's an
he
only
was an
child.
only child. He did have several cousins, because I believe the curator of the James Dean Museum in Fairmont, which was basically his house, or his uncle and aunt and uncle's house. I think his name was Marcus Winslow, and to my knowledge, he's still alive. He's probably in his mid-80s now, but he was a few years younger than James Dean. But James Dean always really cared about him. When he'd go back to the farm, he'd play with him. He'd ride him on his motorcycle, or help with like chores around the house, because once he became famous, he would still come back, and and then he could still kind of walk around without. He was recognizable, but it wasn't like wasn't like a mob scene like it was with Elvis or the Beatles, or I guess even Brando in his day when he became a huge movie star.
Well, I mean, James Dean did have his looks,
Yeah, yeah, and also another thing too is mentioned about his father being a hygienist was actually when he was young, James Dean, he was trying to do some kind of, and it was probably makeshift, but a trapeze trick in the backyard of his aunt and uncle's, and actually knocked out his two front teeth. So his two front teeth, once he became famous or well known, were fake, but to me they didn't look it.
I never knew that till you told me today. How about that?
Yeah, yeah, and
So his front teeth were missing. Where he got them?
yeah, because he was probably about maybe 10 or 11, and dentistry back then was probably like in the dark ages, if you think about it, compared to now, because now it's not really that bad, I think, and plus it's evolved so much in the last 70 years or 70 plus years, but yeah, and actually when he went when he did go out to California, it was Santa Monica City College is where he went, so it wasn't UCLA. But this is well before, he had become famous in his own right.
Well, he did he do any plays or anything in New York?
Yeah, he actually played Broadway a few times, because before, I think, right when he was starting to get into television. Remember, television wasn't the medium then; it was radio.
Right.
Because television was still very new, and they didn't know if it was going to last or if it was a passing fad or not. And not everybody had a TV in their house. But yeah, he did several plays, because a lot of people think that's where he cut his teeth, was on it with live stage, because there's really no take two, and if something flubs or not, you just have to flow with it. And
well, a lot of television back in those days was live. They didn't tape it.
That's true.
It was just live.
Yeah, because a lot of James Dean stuff, and maybe a good bit of it, is all done on, is it Kinescope? Am I saying it right?
Kinescope, yeah.
Yeah, and but it's the same thing with Elvis, because like there was and even the Ed Sullivan shows, they did the same thing, because you see that like tinniness to it. But thankfully, whoever did it, or you wouldn't have any print of it or not. I mean, other than just like maybe photographs and maybe even an audio
I've got
recording.
an early picture here of James Dean. Let me pull it up.
Yeah, now that picture right there is from his high school. He graduated, I believe he graduated in 1948.
Yeah.
That made him about 17, 18. Yeah, yeah. And one thing, not to jump all over the place here, but actually about a year before he passed away, he actually went to his one of his high school reunions, and which, because he was already famous by then.
Right.
I think he had maybe already done East of Eden or something like that, but it was different times back then. And also you're talking about Fairmont, Indiana, so it wasn't like it was New York or Los Angeles or Hollywood or something like that.
But he had that look back then, He did.
Yeah, and also he just had the, because one of his trademarks was his brooding, and he wouldn't smile or not, but they think a lot of that went back to when his mother passed away, at such a young age. And if she lived, he may not have went into acting, or he may not have been, because whatever, they say what you grow up with is basically becomes who you are, with that. Because his dad, of course, wanted him just to get a regular job doing whatever. But, and even back then it was tough to be famous like it is today, and to stick to it. And I'm sure many people, and especially the older generation, because like his first movie, East of Eden, Raymond Massey played his father, and he was already a well-known star then, hated his kind of acting. He didn't get it. But that animosity where they bucked heads was perfect because you got the father figure, you got the teenage child, and of course, but if that can come across screen as believable, then that's a win-win situation.
Raymond Massey was great in that part. He was just really kind of a bastard in it,
Yeah.
He was just so
who
mean.
was the director, Al? It was not Fernando Rey, because he was, or was it Fernando Rey? Because for Rebel Without a Cause, but for I know John's. I'm drawing a blank here. But it was. I know as soon as you say it.
Let me find it. Thank goodness we have our phones to look stuff up. Hang on a second.
Yeah, because. Oh no! Or was it Nicholas Ray? I think Nicholas Ray is the one who did.
I think you're right.
He's the one who did Rebel Without a Cause, but East of Eden's the one that put him on the map. Played Cal. And actually, a little sidebar here. There's a screen test, maybe about a minute or two long, where he's screen testing with Paul Newman for Paul Newman to be his brother.
I think I've seen that on YouTube. I think that is on YouTube. Yeah.
But Paul Newman didn't get the part. But the thing is there was a couple of movies that James Dean was all set to do, but he was killed, that Paul Newman went on to do, so that put him on the map. And Elvis was already famous, but Elvis's fourth movie, King Creole, was originally titled A Stone for Danny Fisher, because Danny Fisher was the character name in it. That was slated for James Dean, but it went to Elvis instead. And that was one of the few movies that the critics actually praised Elvis for. With it, but also Michael Curtiz, who directed Casablanca was in King Creole, and then also you had Walter Matthau. So you had, and Carolyn Jones, Vic Morrow. Vic Morrow I thought was a brilliant actor, and he always played a good heavy. Even going up into the early 80s until he died.
And thanks to you, I have a King Creole half sheet hanging over there.
That is right, yeah.
Half sheet. Yeah. That was a birthday present.
Yep. When you were 50 years old. What was that?
A long time ago.
Was that last week?
Yeah. Do you know what James Dean's character name was in East of Eden?
Cal Trask, am I right?
Jeff? No. Yeah.
Cal
You're
Trask?
right, Cal Trask.
Yep.
And
I forget who, I want to say, who was the guy with blonde hair? He passed away just a couple years ago. They said he rivaled Elvis in fame.
Dennis Hopper?
No, it wasn't Dennis Hopper, but he was in 2 movies of his. But not, you and I watched a documentary on him a couple years ago, and he had blonde hair.
Tab Hunter.
The guy looked like Tab Hunter, but it wasn't him.
Right.
But there's a scene in East of Eden where he's, it may even be in a trailer, but he's riding on top of a train, like a boxcar, which was dangerous, but he wraps himself up like a cocoon and that kind of acting never happened back then, because you still had that wooden style that goes back to the 30s, the 40s, and then in the 50s when it changed with Brando. But that was the brilliance of James Dean, because that was ad-libbed. And there's another scene in East of Eden where he gives his dad $4,000 or $5,000 because his father ends up losing a good bit of his fortune for whatever it is. The war happens in World War I, and he loses a lot of his money. Well, James Dean's character Cal ends up investing in some kind of stock, gets the money back and gives it to him, but then his father turns it down, so it devastates him. But there's a scene where he's hugging him, and Raymond Massey, his father, gets angry at him. He starts screaming, "Go, Cal, stop it, stop it!" And what James Dean is doing is he's whispering obscenities in his ear to get that reaction. So it upsets Raymond Massey, and that's brilliant.
It's a very brilliant scene.
Yeah,
actually.
because to do that, and because when you can get that kind of anger on screen, kind of like, I won't go too sideways here, but in Jaws with Richard Dreyfuss and Robert Shaw, well, apparently they couldn't stand each other. It could just be an older, younger thing or whatever, but it came across on screen as brilliant. Because if you can get that anger, because that's what you're trying to get, and it looks believable, not fake or canned, to me that's brilliant. And that was the good thing about James Dean, when he would get angry or when he would cry. I mean, when he'd cry, he'd just go into shambles. But it was believable. What teenager hasn't, like, you don't get what you want, or you don't get your way, or whatever it is, and you just fall apart at the seams, and oh my God, the sky's going to fall, and it doesn't. You get through the day, and then you grow up.
How was the movie received at the box office?
Did very well at the box office, and that's what put James Dean on the map, because he was known in television, and he had a few bit parts. Because the very first movie he had a bit part, and it's maybe a minute long or not, and of course you can see it on YouTube. It was called Fixed Bayonets. It was a throwaway movie. but I had to actually see where they edited it down because I watched the whole movie.
Yeah, if you blink your eyes, you'll miss him.
Oh yeah, and he's in it for a moment. And there was another some kind of Julius Caesar-ish kind of. He wasn't the lead in it, but that he was in that. But his first starring role, and pretty much his acting debut as a leading role, was in East of Eden as Cal, because he was brilliant. And in a way, it was just like, with his character Raymond Massey, his father. In real life, he didn't get along with his father. Even after he became famous, he still didn't get along with his dad.
I think he put a lot of that into his character.
Yeah.
In East of Eden.
Yeah, he had demons. I think as we all do, but he had demons that maybe people didn't understand, but it made him who he was, that were just came across. I mean, because like getting back to Elvis, how famous he was, and he was terribly shy, but then to get up on a global stage and do what he did. But some people have it, and like Johnny Carson, they said 20 million people on a nightly basis. He was brilliant. But then he had a party of 30, he'd be a wallflower. That's just what it was. But he just had that, once that red light comes on, or action or whatever.
There's a lot of actors that they're terrified to go in public and do stuff, but yet they do it because that's what they do. But they just
I'm sure the
once they get up there, it's okay.
Yeah, because just like I mean, she was big for a moment, but Kim Basinger, I mean, they said she was painfully shy. I mean, she'd just get these laughing giggles when she'd be on Carson or Leno or whatever, but she, whatever she was able to do to, get through it, because I mean, everybody has their own acts, like, or what they can do. Like, if you're going to get up and speak in front of a bunch of people, everybody says, "Oh, imagine them all in their underwear or something."
How do you think James Dean was received by young people back in the day during East of Eden, Rebel Without a Cause, and Giant?
Yeah, now. East of Eden was the only movie. He was only a movie star for about 9 months before he passed. So Rebel Without a Cause was in the can. It hadn't been released yet. And then Giant came out in 56. But the teenager immediately jumped on him. I mean, as in where they enjoyed him. Because there's a 1976 TV movie, and actually it's not bad, where they're talking about James Dean and his life, and then, of course, what goes on. But where a lot of the teenagers would write him letters where they were, they identified with Cal, his character in East of Eden, how it was like, well, my parents don't get me, and I'm going to run away, and I want to marry, and all of that. And but there was one young lady who ended up killing herself, and it really devastated him, because now, once you become famous, it's like Helter Skelter with the Beatles. The Beatles had nothing. It's a good song. What Manson did with it is something else. But to throw that like, oh, well, because you did this. No, Helter Skelter is about a roller coaster, and I didn't know this till recently, over in England. And plus, it's a brilliant song. It's the Beatles off the White Album. But it's not fair to say, oh, because what you did, and, these people passed away or not. And unfortunately, that young girl, but once you're famous like that, in a way, you kind of become public property. Elvis had to go through the same thing, or somebody, God forbid, passes away driving to your concert. I mean, but it's not you. It's just, it's life, and it's part of the crazy thing of fame that goes along with it.
Well, regardless of East of Eden and Giant, Rebel is his most famous movie.
Yeah. Well, it was so iconic because it was perfect for its time. The times were changing then, where it was like, and you're from this generation too, where it's like teenagers or kids are meant to be seen and not heard. But that kind of changed in the 50s, because it was starting to shift where teenagers were actually having their own money, and a lot of time with money, you can maybe, I won't say make the rules, but people listen to you because you have spending power.
Now here's a half sheet I put up. Now you don't. Now Marty just bought a half sheet
about 2-3 months ago,
and you paid what, $1,100 for it? I think it was. You got a good deal on it.
Yeah, I think I paid. I forget what the guy wanted, but I was able to talk him down a little bit. Now, of course, I was telling my wife this. I said, I kind of wish I'd have bought it back in the 80s, but then woulda, coulda, shoulda. Then I could have gotten a lot cheaper. But it's in very good condition for 60 years old.
Now this is a style of one sheet here, but this is not the one that you have.
Yeah, the one you got there, I think, is a style B. Because the one I have, and I think, ladies and gentlemen, he's about to click on it, and you can see. And the one Al's about to click on, that'll be, that was the one. Yeah, there we go.
And this is the one that you have.
Correct. Yeah.
Actually, I like this poster you have better.
Yeah. I'd love to have the one sheet, but it's so expensive. But to be 68 years old, and I'd wanted one for years. I mean, I still want a Rolex, but at least that was cheaper.
But you had this one framed, and you had the nice blue border around it.
Yeah, because actually I didn't know what double matting was, and the lady at the store didn't talk me into it, but I just when I thought about it, I was like, yeah, and it just what it was. It's like a red background, red matting, and then there's under the double matting is a little bit of orange. So if you see where his name is, I think Natalie Woods, and also Rebel Without a Cause, that's where you can see. It just made it pop, which was really good. But something like that, I really wanted to get professionally framed, and it's really good. And it's his most iconic role, and even his name in it, Jim Stark. I mean, that's just a cool name.
It is. Well, I have a trailer from you. Let's take a look at the trailer.
Absolutely.
All right.
1955. And before you start that, Al, it was still about, if memory serves me right, about 6 to 8 weeks after James Dean died that the movie actually came out. So the only movie was East of Eden, and it was about 9 months he was a movie star before he passed away. So the other two, in other words, his most iconic, of course, being Rebel Without a Cause, because he just blew the audiences away with his character of a tortured teenage soul.
Now, this trailer is the actual trailer from 1955.
Yep.
Let's take a look at it. Hang on, here we go.
Drunken brawls those parties turn into. It's no place for kids.
A minute ago, you said you didn't care if he drinks.
He said a little drink.
You're tearing me apart!
What?
You say one thing, he says another, and everybody changes back again!
Girls don't love their father. Since when? Since I got to be 16?
Stop that!
I love you, Jim. I really mean it.
No. No, I don't want you to go to the police. There were other people. Why should you be the only one involved?
But I am involved. We are all involved. Mom, a kid was killed tonight.
This is all going too fast for me.
You better give me something. You better give me something fast.
Jimmy, you're very young. A foolish decision now could wreck your whole life. In 10 years, you'll never know this even happened.
Dad, answer her.
Stand up! You want to kill your own father? Gary! That's a great trailer.
It's a brilliant trailer. And also there's, of course, he and Natalie Wood, if he'd have lived, I hope they'd have done a couple more movies together, because they really had charisma on screen together. And also Dennis Hopper. So remember, James Dean only had 3 movies, but Dennis Hopper was in 2 of them. He was in, of course, Rebel Without a Cause. He was one of the gang members. And then also he was in Giant as well. And I think Dennis Hopper was only maybe about 17 or 18 years old, but he said he was just mesmerized at how good he was. And, of course, Jim Backus, who played the henpecked father, of course, went on to, I think he did the voice of Mr. Magoo, and then also played the rich person in
Gilligan's Island.
In Gilligan's Island. Also, I don't know if it showed in the trailer, but the guy who is like the captain of the police. Anyway, there's a famous scene where James Dean is punching a desk because he's so angry, and of course he injures himself. But the guy playing him is I forget I don't know if it's Oliver Pratt. But and maybe it's anyway. He was the gentleman who played in Get Smart's boss.
Oh yeah, I know you. I can't.
Yeah,
think of his name.
and he had
exactly
a
who
great
you're
voice.
talking
Yeah,
about.
he died in like 73, 74, but his son is famous in his own right as well. And then also you had because Elvis was friends with him, the Rebel, Nick Adams, because he and Elvis hung out a lot together, and I think it was just Elvis was drawn to him just because Elvis was such a huge fan of James Dean that he actually hung out with Nick Adams, and they became good friends because apparently Elvis's mother was really a fan of, really liked Nick Adams, and Elvis and Natalie Wood dated for a little bit in '56, but also Dennis Hopper became friends with Elvis, and when Elvis was famous in '56, he'd ask him, you know, where'd James Dean go, and he'd show him like where he went, and you know, like we're on Mulholland Drive, which is very curvy, and where, you know, James Dean just fly around with absolutely no regard, you know, for safety or not. I think that was it for the stars from that. Oh, and of course Sal Mineo, I think Sal Mineo was a star in his own right, but he kind of got typecast as he's always played a misunderstood teenager, or they used to call him the Switchblade Kid, because, you know, once the 50s left, of course, things change, and you go into the 60s and 70s, and people have their own rebels and everything, but he kind of got typecast.
And he died a tragic death, too.
Yeah, 19... Oh, and speaking of that, Al, so the top three stars of Rebel Without a Cause all died tragically. In 1955, James Dean, of course, was killed in a car crash.
Right.
Sal Mineo in 1976 was stabbed to death out in Los Angeles due to a robbery or something gone bad, and actually died on the public street. And then Natalie Wood in 1981, I think it was Catalina Island, drowned.
There's still some mystery around that.
Yeah.
I don't think Robert Wagner was completely honest about that, but that's a
Well, you know,
different
the only
story,
three, and we won't go too far into it, but the only, maybe that's another podcast. But
who killed Natalie Wood?
Yeah, but Natalie Wood, it was in 81. They were filming Brainstorm. Wasn't that good of a movie, in my opinion. But only one on the boat was the captain, Robert Wagner, or RJ as they called him.
That's right.
Natalie Wood and Christopher Walken. So apparently there was a lot of drinking going on, and of course you have egos and they're big stars, and that was it. Now I just think she probably got upset, and I'll show you, I'll leave, and then she was terrified
Well, maybe
of the
she
water.
just fell off the boat. I mean, you know.
Well, they said that, you know, the autopsy, she had all these bruises on her arms and legs. I'm like, but when you're trying to get on a boat in the middle of the night scared, you're going to be hitting, because it's just like you can see people with their fingernails, and if they're clawing for your life, I mean, you know, you kick it, you know, all those adrenaline kicks in, you know, and they were probably a little bit into the wine too, so.
Oh, they were a little inebriated.
Yeah, but some people say the movie was cursed, you know, but then Dennis Hopper lived a long time, and we know he was allegedly a fan of the
you know, Dennis Hopper's son is a pretty good actor in his own right, Henry Hopper.
Yeah.
He's made some really good movies.
And the thing with Dennis Hopper is, I mean, I know he lived a pretty hedonistic lifestyle from what I've read, but I mean, even up until he passed away, I mean, he had his wits about him, and he could tell a good story. But I think he was a very good actor. He always played a good bad guy. But he always spoke highly of James Dean. And another thing, too, was... and Sammy Davis Jr. was already a big star, but he and James Dean were pretty good friends because apparently, and you know this, I mean, when they're doing a scene, I mean, they'll have like of a costume, they'll have three, because if one messes up, they ended, So anyway, apparently there was three of those iconic red jackets. I think James Dean kept one, another one was kept for wardrobe, and then James Dean as a gift gifted it to Sammy Davis Jr., but apparently he actually wore it out and just got rid of it. But, you know, you don't think that, you know, 50s.
Well, they have. It's just like the Wizard of Oz. They had several of those slippers that Judy Garland wore. You know,
because remember Turner Broadcast, and I remember I used to work at Turner Broadcasting years ago. Because
along with me,
Al got the job, thankfully, put me on career path, which I'm very thankful for. But they had the Turner store down there. This is 30-something years ago at CNN Center, and they actually had, I think there was maybe 3 pair of the ruby slippers, and those things are probably worth a couple million because they actually had it. I mean, then it was just under plexiglass. I mean, because when he bought MGM in '86, not only did he buy the rights to all the films, but all the props, because actually he owned about 14 of Elvis's movies, because Elvis did quite a few MGM movies. Now, James Dean didn't. I think James Dean was solely under Warner Bros., because when he passed away, he actually had just signed a 7-year picture deal with Warner Brothers to the tune of $1 million, which even now $1 million isn't too shabby. But back then, you're talking serious money.
Well, speaking of Turner, not to get off the subject, but Marty, he sweet talked some lady that worked over there, and he got a whole box of actual Elvis two boxes of Elvis contracts, original contracts that Elvis had signed from MGM, and then.
Well, I remember
you came over here one night and you brought this big box of.
Well, what it was that this lady, and of course she'll remain nameless, but it was Iron Mountain then.
They stored all this.
Or no, I'm sorry, it wasn't Iron Mountain, but it was data management, basically the same thing. Well, anyway, I was in my office, and all of a sudden here's boom, and it was 2 boxes. I said, I thought she wanted me to ship them out. She goes, these are the Elvis files. I was telling her, I was like, you're kidding. And so I went in there, and not only was there signed contracts, multiple. I mean, we're talking
there were
dozens
checks in there too.
Easily. There was probably Elvis's signature minimum 40 times, maybe more. Yeah. There was check stubs, which is amazing. I mean, back in the 60s, Elvis was getting like $80,000 a week. Even now, that's a crazy amount of money. But also they had late notices, like he'd come in with a nosebleed because he was roughhousing, or he was late or whatever, or... and it was amazing because Al and I, for like 5 hours, we combed through all of the
on
archives.
my living room floor in there. And there was actual contracts where MGM would lend him 16-millimeter prints for the life of the print. He could show movies in his house.
And it was a 2-page document, and the gentleman's name was Saul Rittenberg. He was the VP, I guess, over Elvis Presley projects back then. And Elvis would say, like he wanted a print of Jailhouse Rock. What he would do is he would sign the contract. And then upon Elvis's death, those films would go back to him. But it was just amazing because there was times where you'd see and we've all done it, where the pen doesn't work and you kind of do it like that. And I was just like, no, you want to give Elvis a pen that works. But back then what they would do, and maybe still to this day, but they would do 6 contracts. So it'd be 6 drafts, one for Elvis, one for his manager, one for MGM, one for publishing, one for copyright, blah, 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 whatever. But 6 contracts, and actually Al and I held Jailhouse Rock, which is arguably one of his biggest movies, and maybe his most iconic.
We had the contract
in our hand, and it was like I don't know, early '57 when he did it, because that was right when he finished. That is when he was drafted. Of course, they got the deferment so they could do King Creole, because King Creole was it Paramount? Is that right?
Paramount, yes.
Paramount, okay, yeah.
It's a shame he had to give those back.
Those well, I mean, and this is back then, but now with eBay and seriously, because it's original, and and also you have the vice president. I mean, not that all that matters. The most important thing is Elvis's signature on it, but even Colonel Parker, because Colonel Parker got his big slice of that pie.
That's true.
Yep.
And one thing good about Turner, when he bought MGM, he had all these really cool photographs from MGM movies framed, and I have a couple of them here, and you have the Elvis one.
When I left Turner Broadcasting in October of '94, my boss, we had words over the years, but all in all, he was a good guy. I remember my office, I had a picture from 1972 of Elvis on stage from Elvis on tour with the cape and everything. And I remember my boss went over and took it off the wall, and he goes, here. And he goes, you earned it. And that was very nice, because this is back then now. It was about $200. Now, TBS Productions, they were the ones who would mat the pictures and everything, but it was an original print. And, like I said, and I still got it now. It's in great condition, because I did have it over the jukebox at the house, but I moved it into another room, and then now I have the James Dean one sheet of Rebel Without a Cause.
That's over your jukebox.
The jukebox that Al so graciously sold me.
One more thing about Turner, then we'll get back to James Dean in a second, but Dee Woods was...
Yeah, she was Ted Turner's.
I love Dee Wood. She was wonderful.
Yeah, she either started with Ted either in '69 or '70, and this is right when he bought
MGM.
No. He bought MGM in '86, but when he bought Turner Broadcasting, which was WTCG, it was a billboard company, and either in '69 or '70 is when he bought it and then changed it into a broadcasting company. And she was with him. I mean, when they were probably just, they were probably all having to bring in sack lunches and stuff.
Well, I was
like
on
that.
the top floor. I went up to see D. Woods about something, and they had a Gone with the Wind movie poster there, and they had an actual Oscar.
14th floor. The Oscar was. This is what was really cool. Well, Ted was just I think he was a brilliant visionary, and plus he paid my salary for 5.5 years, which I'm thankful for, and also taught me about corporate America. But when you'd walk up there, see, anybody who knows Ted pretty well, he was pretty much obsessed with Gone with the Wind, and even when he would dress back then, he'd favor Rhett Butler's character with the mustache and everything. So you had the original movie poster, and at that time it was probably $10,000. Now it's probably worth. But also he had Clark Gable's Oscar mounted right there. I mean, you could literally just go up and touch it outside his office.
I asked D. Woods I said, "Can I actually hold that?" So she opened up the little cabinet and let me hold it.
And I guarantee you, Al, now that would probably go for probably $500,000, maybe even more.
Well, even Ted named one of his sons Rhett.
Yeah,
I became friends with.
I think Ted had 6 children, and I mean, I don't think Rhett would remember me, but I knew him for a moment in time, and he was very nice because he goes, "I'm Rhett Turner," and I was like, "Wow." But I was in like my early 20s then. But he was, he was a very nice guy, and I guess, I guess if a movie or a character really affects you, you can name your children that.
Well, it was fun days. Here's the iconic red jacket.
Yeah. And that is just, that is classic because a couple years ago, and I just stumbled across the internet, apparently the only original one that they know of was still around in very good condition. It did have a cigarette hole in it because, of course, James Dean was a huge smoker. Because Chesterfield was his favorite brand of cigarettes, but apparently there was a cigarette hole in it, which to me just makes it authentic. And not only that, I mean, if you remember, Al, in Rebel Without a Cause, they do the Chicky Run, where they're basically going to run off the cliff. And remember, Buzz Gunderson goes over and dies. Well, James Dean jumps out of the car, so it had some stains on everything, grass stain or dirt stains, But I would love to have that jacket. I mean, that's at least $1 million piece of property right there. I think, that's probably right up there with. Only thing maybe more iconic than that would probably be his car that he crashed, but they never know what happened to it.
We were talking about that earlier. It's amazing. They don't know what happened to the crash car.
George Barris, who used to customize a lot of vehicles. He actually customized like one of Hank Williams' Cadillacs. Mm-hmm. Also, the gold Cadillac, the 1960 gold Cadillac that Elvis had, which is now in the Country Music Hall of Fame. George Barris did it because it was a $100,000 vehicle. This is back in 1960, so that'd be like $1 million car today. But when James Dean was killed, George Barris bought it, stripped it, sold like the tires, maybe the I don't know if the transmission was still intact, but a few things off of it. And then what he did was the car, and you can clearly see it online, was so bad it looked like a crushed, like somebody taking a beer can just ripped it open. Well, he closed a little bit of it to kind of make it look like a car again. Mm-hmm. Then he sent it out on tours to high schools where it said James Dean's last car, and it was kind of like a PSA, like like drinking and driving with kids, or like some of the highway patrol films we'd see in Driver's Ed. So it was kind of like Speed Kills, and they sent it out, and then in 1959 it ended up just disappearing. They were shipping it from Miami to Los Angeles, I think, or Bakersfield or somebody. It was in California, and it was in a sealed container, and when it got there, it was gone. So it could have just been an inside job or whatever, and they never found it because about 10 or 15 years ago, Volvo, the car corporation, offered $1 million to anybody who could actually, lead to the finding of that car. Because I think that car was like $7,000 that James Dean paid for it. James Dean actually had another Porsche because once he got, he signed that contract with Warner Brothers, and of course he was flushed with cash. So he got that first Porsche, but then this new one came out that apparently was a little bit lighter, the silver one.
Right.
And that's the one he ended up trading in, but it was a $7,000 car, which was a lot of money because back then you could probably get a decent brand new car for probably maybe even $1,000 because a Cadillac back then was maybe about $3,000. You know.
What was the name of the car he called?
Yeah.
That's good.
This is a good one.
Interesting story.
Yeah, on the back of the trunk was spelled Little Bastard, and it was in quotation marks. But the reason why he named it Little Bastard, Jack Warner, who of course owned Warner Brothers, when James Dean finished filming Rebel Without a Cause, well, of course he had a trailer there like most movie stars do.
Right.
Well, he hung around for a couple weeks after that, and Jack Warner's like, once you're done, get your stuff and leave until we need you again or not. And he was dragging his feet on it. So it got back to Jack Warner, and he said, look, I want that Little Bastard off the lot now. So James Dean is kind of like a middle finger to Jack Warner, named it Little Bastard, and I thought that was brilliant. But it's so funny with that because, that was pretty profane back in 55.
Well, they had a documentary on TCM not long ago
About Jack Warner.
about the Warner Brothers, all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And Jack Warner was not really a nice guy. In fact, he hated actors. He did not have a fondness for actors at all.
Speaking of not being a nice guy, just ask Joan Crawford after she wasn't making any more money. They couldn't get her off that lot quick enough. It's like, you're going.
He in fact, when his younger brother died, he didn't even go to the funeral.
Yeah.
And he was a womanizer. He was married, but he cheated on his wife. And he was just not a great character.
Right.
Now, he ran Warner Brothers to a T, but personally, he wasn't a
But
great
the thing
guy.
is back then, he considered actors and actresses property.
Yeah.
But even back then, I mean, because to be famous it's like a 1% to even make it, and of course the harder thing is keeping it. But they were like considered property back then. But it was still like the perks still outweighed it because, I mean, going back to like Clark Gable, he was making like $50,000 a picture back in the late 30s. That was very good money.
And he was with MGM mostly, and then he went to Warner Brothers, did a few things. I think.
But forgive me, Al. Were we in conversation a second ago?
But we're talking about Jack Warner.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
But James Dean did an interview with
Gig Young
about
public service announcement
about driving and trying to be,
because actually
safe on the roads.
And Al's going to play the clip for us, and this is very famous and prolific and a cautionary tale. But James Dean was still filming Giant because they had it in his because they knew that he was
in costume from Giant.
Yeah, because he's dressed as a cowboy and he's actually playing with a rope because he was taking roping lessons to make it look more authentic. Jet Rink was his character name, but literally 2 weeks. Oh, I'm sorry. Forgive me. Let me back up a second. When they realized that he used to love to speed around in cars and motorcycles and everything, they had it in his contract. He could not do any races because they don't want to be halfway through a movie and then all of a sudden he's, God forbid, injured or killed. But literally 2 weeks after the fact that PSA was filmed, he actually passed away. But it's just like I said, one of those cautionary tales.
Let's take a look at it.
Absolutely.
With Gig Young.
James Dean. Hi, Jimmy.
Hi, Gig.
We asked Jimmy over today because he's a racing man himself. A real one, not a crazy one. Incidentally, I think I should explain that Jimmy just stepped over from the set of Giant. And need I add, he plays a Texan. Speaking of racing, have you ever been in a drag race?
Are you kidding me?
I just thought I'd ask. No, Jim races in the tradition, you might say. Real racing cars, real tracks. How fast will your car go?
Oh, in honest miles an hour. Clocked, it run about 106, 7.
You've won a few races, haven't you?
Oh, one or two.
Where?
Well, I showed pretty good at Palm Springs. I ran at Bakersfield.
Jimmy, we probably have a great many young people watching our show tonight, and for their benefit, I'd like your opinion about fast driving on the highway. Do you think it's a good idea?
A good point. I used to fly around quite a bit, I took a lot of unnecessary chances on the highways. And I started racing, and now I drive on the highways. I'm extra cautious, because no one knows what they're doing. Half the time, you don't know what this guy's going to do with that one. On a track, there are a lot of men who spend a lot of time developing rules and ways of safety. And I find myself being very cautious on the highway. I don't have the urge to speed on the highway. People say racing is dangerous. but I'll take my chances on the track any day than on a highway. Well, Gig, I think I'd better take off.
Oh, wait a minute, Jimmy. One more question. Do you have any special advice for the young people who drive?
Take it easy driving. The life you might save might be mine. You know?
And thanks also to story executive Walter McEwen for telling us how today's headlines help create an absorbing motion picture. We hope when you see Rebel Without a Cause at your favorite theater, that this glimpse behind the cameras of how a story was born will help you enjoy the picture more. I'll be back in a moment to tell you about next week's Behind the Cameras.
That's a classic.
Yeah, and I was asking Al when that was running for the audience here how clear that is, because that was filmed in 55, if that was 16 millimeter or 35
They
millimeter.
shoot at 35.
And of course the quality on 35, and also if it's studio, you know, like Warner Brothers, they're going to use the finest of equipment, you know, for back then or high tech. But
Right.
that was very good. And also Al mentioned another thing too. We'd mentioned about the tragedy of the top 3 stars in Rebel Without a Cause passing away. Gig Young also passed away too, even though he wasn't in the movie, but he was interviewing James Dean there.
He was in an Elvis movie too.
That's right, yeah. In 1978, he passed away tragically and violently. But yeah, he was in Kid Galahad with Elvis, and also
He was in They Shoot Horses, Don't They, with Jane Fonda, which that's one of my favorite movies.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also, and one more thing on Gig Young, I'm a huge, and Al knows, fan of Twilight Zone. By the way, we need to do a podcast on Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
But probably my favorite, if I had to choose, one's called Walking Distance. And it's with Gig Young. It's brilliant.
He wants to go back to his childhood. He goes back to his hometown, and he sees himself as
a young boy, and he wants to tell him all this. But it's like if I went back and told 17-year-old Marty, I probably wouldn't listen. Or just like if Al went back and told 17-year-old Al, I mean, would you listen to yourself or not? You just don't know. I think it's just all part of life, and you know, you just I think you try and get through the best way you can.
I've got the iconic picture from Giant. Here we go.
That's classic, yeah. And that's just, and the thing about James Dean is he had a swagger to him. But even there's only a few interviews of him, but like the one Al just played of the highway safety PSA, I mean, he's humble. There's that shyness there, but then he could get up and he could flip into a different gear when he was acting and do takes and stuff like that. And what he did for his time was he was very far ahead of his time with his style of acting, because he did change Hollywood, I think. And also, he was the first ever to be nominated for an Academy after he had passed away.
He got a posthumous award for I was reading for his movies at the Oscars.
Right.
For East of Eden, and I think Rebel.
Oh, and Al, you know, another thing too is, of course, he did 3 movies, but the only movie that he was had top billing in was Rebel Without a Cause. So they were introducing him in East of Eden, but then in Giant, he was co-starred with Elizabeth Taylor, because, of course, the lead draw there was Rock Hudson.
Well, Giant, I actually liked that movie, but it was kind of like they wanted to kind of redo another Gone with the Wind, this epic, grandiosa movie with all these big stars, and they lived in the big mansion there.
Well, and also
I love that scene with James Dean after he strikes oil.
Right.
You know, he's got oil, and he goes to the house, and Elizabeth
he
Taylor's come out
he
there.
couldn't be any more arrogant about it. But he was very believable, because then all of a sudden he went from literally a pauper to where he had a couple of $1 million.
And he looked at Elizabeth Taylor says, "You look good enough to eat."
And that's when Rock Hudson decks
That's
him.
when Rock Hudson is hauled off and punched him.
Because it's funny when he gets a punch in on Rock Hudson, you can actually see when Rock Hudson you can see his shirt has oil or whatever they used for that scene. But
it was a great cast. There were a lot of good people in that movie.
Getting back to East of Eden, the director was Elian Kazan. Kazan, excuse me. That's the one I had
Kazan, either one.
Yeah, forgotten about. But and also and on his death, when he passed away, literally 2 hours before he died, he was ticketed with speeding. Now, some people say that he wasn't speeding when he crashed, but there's just too much evidence there because, first of all, he was a movie star by then, so you probably have the inflated ego, and you just got ticketed for speeding, so, and I'm sure that didn't really deter him at all, and also you're going to a race, but, his reputation preceded him, because many a times they say he would just fly around Hollywood like, just hairpin turns, and he would just pass somebody. And that's got to be startling. But, a lot of time you just have the youthful indiscretions.
Well, he was a rebel for sure.
Yeah, because they think he was probably doing about 82 miles an hour when the impact happened. Because they say his last words were, the guy will see us, he's got to. And then that was it. Now, there has been some folklore where they said that James Dean wasn't driving. But what happened was, of course, it was a convertible. He was riding with his mechanic from Porsche, and that gentleman was thrown clear. Now, he was injured pretty bad, but he survived. But what happened with James Dean, that's right before he stopped at a 5 and dime to fill
the
up.
Picture here,
Yeah. And the way these pictures were taken was his entourage he had back with him. When they were going to the race, there was a photographer from Warner Brothers, and he was going to take all these pictures. Because there's actually a few pictures of him in his car driving literally maybe a few minutes and maybe even moments before the crash. But I guess, I don't know if that police officer's still alive. There's some YouTube videos of him who gave him the ticket.
That's not a very big car.
No, not all. Well, see, and the thing is, it was very light and it was aluminum. So you got to think, Al, at dusk, if that thing's coming and the sun's setting, that's going to blend perfectly. They call it sunshine slowdown. So they think Donald Turnipseed is the one who was involved in the accident with him. He was coming the other way and he turned in front of James Dean, but he probably just didn't see him. And what happened was they think that James Dean tried to drive through it. You have that split second, like, do I hit the brakes or do I gun it? And we've all done it where you gun it and you miss by the skin of your teeth. And what happened was it just, whatever way they were supposed to go to get out of these way, it just was perfect how it all came together, and it was catastrophic. But Donald Turnipseed, I think, maybe had a bloody nose and a bump in his head. But do you know, Al,
What was he driving?
He was driving a 51 Ford, I believe. And
Which is a bigger car.
Yeah. Well, what happened was, he turned, so James Dean's coming this way, and there's a little fork, and what Donald Turnipseed, he was about 24 at the time, he turns like this, so James Dean tries to drive through and he can't, clips him, and so that spins James Dean around, it throws him into a barbed wire fence.
Right.
So what happened was James Dean was ejected, thrown into the fence, then thrown back into the car. So he was just like a rag doll, because he did survive the crash, but they think only for about 45 minutes, because they said that he had the, and if we've all heard it, like the death rattle, it's like what you go through right before you're passing, because there's so much trauma there. It's just basically like an engine shutting down. But they said that he wasn't badly, I'm not saying his body wasn't badly broken, but he wasn't all horribly disfigured, like they say, because there was, when word got around that somebody famous had died in Shalom, California, was where it happened, because he was heading to Salinas for a race, I think the following day, which would have been October 1st. He ended up, this gentleman, who's probably a teenager, knew somebody at the morgue. It was a small town, and he wanted to come down, and he was able to look at him. Right. And they said when they looked at the body, they said he had bruising on his chest and a little bit of glass there, but he wasn't horribly disfigured. But it still took his life, because they think when he either hit the fence, that broke his neck, or when he was thrown back in, everything was metal. There was no seatbelts back then, or if they were just across your lap. That's what did it, because even if James Dean would have survived, he probably would have he would have been the rest of his life with those kind of injuries, for that. Oh, and another thing too, most people don't know, but when they put him into an ambulance, he actually got into another accident. There was another accident with that, and
with the ambulance.
With the ambulance, yeah, and they stopped and went on, but it was enough to shake the body. But that didn't matter, because
I don't think that would have saved him, though. I mean, if he hadn't had the wreck.
No, because I think even if he'd had the accident, and then all of a sudden, boom, there's doctors and an OR. No, because they said, like with John Lennon, even if this is more tragic because somebody took his life, but even if he'd have been shot and right in an OR room, they immediately worked on him. There was too much damage there, and broken necks. I mean, those are hard.
I'm surprised he lived 45 minutes.
Yeah, because they did say that it took them a little bit just to, because those things were clutches. I think it was like a 4-speed. They said that they actually it took them a little bit just to get his feet untangled from, because, you know, you're talking 80 miles an hour, and in a way you're kind of coming to a quick stop, you know, and when you see actual, and I don't know if you can pull it up, Al, but if not, no worries, but when you see the actual car itself, it literally looks like a tornado, because you couldn't even tell what kind of car it was. It looked like...
I don't have one of the wrecks.
Yeah, but it was it's pretty badly mangled, because there's probably about maybe, I don't know, 15 pictures of it or not. But when George Barris got a hold of it, he kind of had to do a little bit of work just to make it look like somewhat of a car again. Because
you know, I've seen pictures of it. It's just mangled.
Yeah, well,
aluminum.
there was a few people that were around when it, happened, and one was behind Donald Turnipseed, the one, you know, was in the accident with James Dean, said that one of James Dean's hubcap came flying over their car, and they could hear like, you know, because it was a projectile. And but they said when they got up there and tried to help, Rolf, I forget what the gentleman's last name was, he was the mechanic who was pretty badly injured. There was a scene of him actually laying on the ground, you know, and back then they wouldn't stabilize you. They just basically put you up into a meat wagon, you go. But he did survive it for several years, and then of course he ended up passing away in 81. But a lot of them just said that they didn't think he was going to make it because it was so bad. And it was probably about maybe 2 hours when it started to get around who had passed away, you know, for that. Because when word got back to Warner Brothers, he was already cut loose, because he'd done all of his, you know, looping and voiceovers that they had to do. Liz Taylor, they said she was devastated, because they were wrapping up Giant, and she was doing some voiceover work and looping or whatever they call it, and that Jack Warner actually shut Warner Brothers down for a day, which I thought was very respectful, because, you know, he just didn't care.
He made Warner Brothers a lot of money.
Yeah, and but when they had to ship the body back from California to Indiana, his father actually rode in the vehicle with him the whole way back.
Wow.
You know, but he never really reconciled, because when he passed away...
What was he worth when he passed away?
Yeah, when he passed away, he was worth... His whole estate, James Dean estate, cash and, you know, and everything else that goes along with it, was about $96,000, which of course is
a lot of money back then.
And his father inherited all of that. So so the one who didn't even care about him, or didn't have a way of showing it, you know, did they? Because I don't think his father did too many interviews after that, you know. But that's once the legend started to grow. And then when Rebel Without a Cause came out, it just was such a huge movie, not only from the car crash itself, but just his brilliant performance. Because even in Giant, the scene is where after James Dean's character Jet Rink becomes rich, they age him like it's 30 years down the road, and even when you see it, they made him look old, and it didn't look stupid and fake.
No, it looked good.
It looked actually real.
Makeup was really good.
Whoops, sorry. Am I still on? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
What'd you do?
Almost pulled off the headset. Sorry.
Dropped
I
your phone?
was. Yeah, I was. I'm glad I didn't do that. But anyway, I like it for 1955 technology, how it still holds up today, because even the Shark and Jaws, I mean, I'll take that animatronics, if that's what they call it, any day over CGI, because that looks more real than what they do now. Because it's just, and the most important thing is it was filmed brilliantly, directed, great acting, producing, everything like that. You know what? And that's what's really... that's just what makes it stand out. And, of course, you know, James Dean being the star, you know, of it, even though he didn't get top billing.
If he'd have lived, do you think that he would have gone on to make many more movies, or he would have been a guy who just said, I've had enough, I don't want to do no more?
I don't think he'd have went the Brando route, because Brando would really... He's like the prototype for Hollywood prima donna. Just, I'm going to shut down production. I'm going to do this. I'm going to rewrite the script. Well, you're not a writer, and you're hired to act, and that's it. So if you've already cashed that check and you signed this contract, you need to honor it. Because there's one thing about Elvis. Elvis made some not so good moves, but he showed up because that's what it was. I mean, you're paid a lot of money, you know, for that. And not only that, all the people on the set. So you might be a millionaire, but what about the guy running grip? Or what about the lady who's the caterer? And all this? Yeah. I mean, you stop all that, and you've got your money just because of the way you're acting. I don't think he'd have went that route. I think he would have. I think he'd have probably at least acted into the 70s. With it. And of course, we'll never know because it was all part of the allure. But to basically just do 3 movies and only one that you were alive before when you were killed, so it wasn't like Rebel had come out yet or Giant. That's just what he was. And he did have a 7-year contract with Warner Brothers. So there were several. Somebody Up There Likes Me, which I think went to
Paul Newman.
Mm-hmm. That was slated for him. So in a way, Paul Newman can say thanks for his career with that. And also, he actually screened. He test screened with James Dean. Is just amazing because I mean I'm a big Paul Newman fan. I thought he was great. They might have actually even worked together. I think if he'd lived, I think at least in the 50s, he and Robert Mitchum. Because remember, Robert Mitchum was a bad boy in the 50s, and he was a good actor. I think they would have been really good together. And I'm sure Elvis would have probably wanted to work with James Dean, but I'm sure Colonel Parker would have squashed it somehow for whatever, just asked for way too much money or whatever.
You know who did a screen test for Rebel Without a Cause? We talked about him earlier. It was Tab Hunter.
That's right. Yeah, I think
they actually did a one sheet or a poster with Tab Hunter. On the poster. But of course he didn't get it. It went to James Dean, but he did test for it.
Yeah, because I think, and also there's what's really good. And I'm so glad that Warner Brothers kept all these. But there's a lot of outtakes. I won't say outtakes, but raw footage, wardrobe footage, and apparently for Rebel Without a Cause, they actually used some gang members from Los Angeles gangs at the time, and where a lot of them didn't get along good.
You're talking about up there at the observatory.
Yeah, because there's one guy. I think his character name is called Crunch. Well, they all had names like Crunch, Spider, whatever. But that was scary in the 50s. But the guy who plays Crunch, apparently he was some kind of gang back then. So they used him as what do you call it when you have somebody on set for not continuity, but some kind of advisor.
Yeah.
Because like in Full Metal Jacket, Arlie Ermey, Sergeant Hartman, he was on there just for a technical advisor or continuity or whatever. And then he was so good, he ended up getting the role for that. So they use that. But apparently when they're filming some of the scenes together, I think a few scuffles broke out. But whatever, it all works because you want that to be on screen where it doesn't look wooden. But even like the leader of the gang who gets killed, Buzz Gunderson. But that's a perfect 50s name. Oh, no, I do think James Dean would have been brilliant in in the 60s, late 60s. Get Your Motor Running. Easy Rider.
Yeah.
I could have seen Dennis Hopper.
Yeah, he could have been.
And I could have seen him in Peter Fonda's role.
Dennis Hopper was perfect for that, but James Dean would have been good in the Peter Fonda role.
Well, and even when I finally saw it, I thought it was like this big fun movie, but when they get killed at the end, I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
Well, it was like Saturday Night Fever. I mean, when I finally saw it, I didn't realize it was kind of like a dark film. I thought it was all this fun dancing, and then the guy ends up dying, and all the language, and I'm no prude, but I was like, oh, I just thought it was dancing in the Bee Gees and white suits, and
No, it was pretty dark.
Yeah. Let's see. And I think. Also, he did date a lady named Liz Sheridan. She was an up and coming actress in the 50s, so she was still learning her craft and waiting to get known. And but her big claim to fame was she played Jerry Seinfeld's mom on the huge show Seinfeld. Because I remember seeing an interview in the late 90s where Leah King asked her, "You dated James Dean?" She goes, "Yeah." I was like, "I never knew that." But he did have a girlfriend. She was a French lady and a French star, a movie star in her own right over in France, that they were pretty close, and they think that he wanted to marry her. But she died in 1971, and some people say it was from a broken heart because of James Dean. But
that was 20-some years later.
Yeah, but, it's like one of those, like, never really got over it or not, Right. So, well, and also I think just the way that he passed away, which was so violent because you're just not expecting it. Because, I mean, the picture you showed of him at the gas station, I mean, and then literally 2 hours later he's gone. But life is precious when you think about it, because you don't think like Elvis when he went in the bath and that's it, or John Lennon, walking to his apartment and he's gunned down.
living relatives of James Dean still alive? Probably not.
Other than cousins, if you remember earlier in the show, I mentioned Marcus Winslow. I believe that's his name. He was a younger cousin. He's in his 80s now, but he's the one who was the curator of the James Dean Museum there in Fairmont, Indiana, and also he's probably the only one. Now he may have distant cousins, but he was an only child. For and one thing I like about James Dean too, because his full name was James Byron Dean. It was his real name. It wasn't like, and I'm not knocking it, but like John Wayne wasn't his real name. Same thing with Marilyn Monroe, you know. But like, it's just a good name.
What's a great name?
But I think Marlon Brando, I think that actually was his name. I don't think he took a stage name. Sterling Hayden's a great name, but I don't know if that was actually his real name.
Well, Tab Hunter was not his real name. Jack Warner gave him that name, Tab Hunter, when he signed a contract with Warner Brothers, and he's called Hunter because he's a big horse guy, and he has Hunter horses, and so Jack Warner actually named him Tab Hunter.
Yeah, and he was a pretty big singer in the late 50s.
He did a song called Young Love.
I always thought that was Pat Boone.
Sonny James did a country version of it.
Oh, Sonny James does a great
but
When the Snow is on the Roses,
but Tab Hunter did the original Young Love.
Yeah, but Tab Hunter was he was big in his own right, because he sold quite a few records. I mean,
well, he recorded that song on Dot Records. The Dot Records is one of my favorite labels out of Tennessee. Pat Boone.
When Tom Jones first came out, or was that Parrot Records?
Parrot Records.
Yeah.
But
Mr. Hips.
But Jack Warner got mad, you know, and this is a true story. He said, "Why are you recording for Dot Records?" He says, "Because Warner Brothers doesn't have a record label." And Jack Warner says, "Well, we do now." And that's when Warner Brothers Records came around.
Yeah. Dot Records, yeah.
Yeah, and then
that makes sense, because Warner Brothers records. I mean, I guess they're still around now, but
Reprise bought
that was Sinatra's. Sinatra started that label.
But I think Warner Records now owns Reprise.
Well, they all gobble each other up, because I don't know who owns RCA, because RCA was the Cat's Meow back in the day, and then of course Capitol Records. Well, who did the Beatles record with?
Capitol.
Yeah.
Well, they were on VJ Records for a while.
VJ, yeah. But they only went to Capitol. I mean, because then everything the Beatles were doing was just gold.
Early records were on VJ. And the
VEJ.
version of She Loves You was on Swan Records. I have the 45s. But, you know.
Yeah, Al's got a nice. Well, the thing about Al's Beatle records is they're all from when he was a teenager, and they're in very good condition.
Yeah, I bought all those records when they were popular.
Well, I know.
I still have them.
I know if I ever win the lottery, I'm definitely want to get an album with all their signatures on it. You know, well, I mean, make sure it's authentic, not just like, oh, here's 50 grand.
You talk about Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow, that iconic album. I don't have that one. I have the one where they took all the
my favorite. Not to go too far off on the Beatles, but I think Meet the Beatles. I thought it was a brilliant, iconic. You know how they almost look like James Bond in a way, because they have the turtlenecks on and their haircuts is black and white and they're not smiling, you know. But kind of going back to James Dean, because if you notice Elvis's movies in the 50s, he didn't smile much because James Dean didn't. He did brooding, you know, and that was what was really, you know, and James Dean pulled it off brilliantly, because, you know, maybe there's a little bit of arrogance there, but it was like he was just a nice guy who was misunderstood, you know, with it, and how things when you're a teenager can just get so sideways when you think, oh, the world's going to end, and then it doesn't, and you get through it because none of us have the answers, you know. But and the thing, I love the title, Rebel Without a Cause. That actually goes back to the Wild one with Marlon Brando. She goes, well, what are you rebelling against? He goes, what he got. So he didn't even know either, but it's just you know, we're pissed just to be pissed, you know. And and remember the motorcycle gang in the Wild Ones? What they were called?
No.
Lee Marvin, the Beatles. Except,
that's right.
But it was spelled like the bug, not the way the Beatles did it.
Yeah.
But that was actually kind of smart. Now that had nothing to do with the Beatles naming theirs. But I thought that was just kind of cool, you know, with that. So, but when it comes to a coolness factor, I mean, I would definitely take James Dean over Marlon Brando. Not only that, James Dean's signature brings in thousands of dollars, because, you know, he didn't sign that much because, you know, well, and I think Brando's is too, but that was just because Brando just wasn't
Well, I'm
nice
sure
when it came
Warner
to that.
Brothers has his contracts in storage somewhere.
You get a contract. I mean, that would, if you had the contract for Rebel Without a Cause, I'd think at least a few $1 million. I don't.
Yeah.
But I mean, even East of Eden or Giant. You know, I do think at the museum, I think they have a fender. They do have something from the car itself. Maybe the transmission. Now, of course, it was mangled, but all you have to do is go on the serial number, and it's there. But I mean, that would bring in big bucks. And I think maybe like the mirror or something like that. And I think also like there's a wooden fence that was supposed to be part of James Dean's house in Rebel Without a Cause. They actually have a section of that there. But stuff like that's just neat that, you know, because when he passed, they probably like, about a year or two, but then this myth took off. Because it's funny how certain people will take off and other people won't. You know what I mean? Just with, you know, what makes them mythical or not, if that makes sense. You know? But I just think it was talent and things happen for a reason, you know, and the whole live fast, die young, and leave a good-looking corpse, that was coined for James Dean. I'm sure he probably wishes he wouldn't have passed away so young, but anyway.
And you brought the DVD of Rebel Without a Cause, I do believe?
We're going to actually view it after the
podcast.
That was the very first movie I ever saw of him. But anybody who's listening, if you haven't seen any of his movies, they're all very good. I like all of them. My favorite is, this is my order, I like Rebel Without a Cause, then East of Eden. That's the one that put James Dean on the map. And then, of course, Giant was his final film. But there's a lot of the Kraft TV hour shows back in the 50s. You know, I never even thought about that.
But you don't see those either. They're not. I mean, you can find them on YouTube, but you can't. As far as buying the DVD set or whatever, you just can't find that stuff.
And I'd never thought about it, but before, you know, Twilight Zone didn't come around in '59, so James Dean already passed away. But I wonder if Rod Serling ever maybe directed him. I may have to Google that and see, because he directed and he did quite a few he wrote screenplays for
way
shows.
before the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, because the Twilight Zone didn't come around until '59, so James Dean had already been gone for 4 years. But he did work, I think, mostly with CBS, because it's CBS Playhouse, and I don't know if
Twilight Zone was a CBS show.
Yeah,
too.
yeah. Because didn't Viacom buy them or something? I remember the old commercials of Viacom.
I think it was, no, it was CBS. CBS bought Viacom, but Viacom bought CBS, because you're right.
Yeah, and
because at the end of the episode, it's got the CBSI.
Yeah, but you know, with reruns or with you know, like the Twilight Zones or whatever. I mean, we've all probably seen them a million times, but you get those things in syndication. Those things are money making machines. Hogan's Heroes, you know, Gilligan's Island, Batman. I mean, Batman was only on for a couple of years, and it's so iconic.
Oh yeah,
you know, and yeah, I just. Is some, but like I said, to be 68 years later, to still be talked about, you know, and I mean, and who he influenced Elvis, because when Elvis found out that James Dean died, he was in Texas. I want to say it might have been Gladewater, Texas. Now, Elvis was already famous in the South, but he hadn't become, you know, he hadn't signed with RCA yet, and he hadn't become global. But they said that he went to his hotel room and cried, because they said he was devastated by him passing, because he even praised him.
What time of day was the crash?
They said it happened a little bit before 6 o'clock. I guess it would be Mountain Time. Yeah, because it's, of course, we're Eastern, Mountain, and then
California
Central.
is 3 hours behind.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. So it was probably around maybe close to 9 o'clock our time. But they think it was around maybe 5:50-ish when the crash happened. And there were people that were there that did stop to render assistance, but the local hospital, I think, was maybe about 30 minutes away, because it was still kind of rural, and maybe it is now, you know, for that. And you know, back then, you know, they wouldn't try and stabilize you. They just didn't know any better. I mean, people were still smoking, you know, because you still had cigarette ads on the TV when he passed away.
That's
you know, and another thing too, if he'd have lived, I mean, you don't know if smoking would have got him, or I mean, like, that's what took George Harrison's life, you know, was smoking, and several other people, Johnny Carson, Yul Brynner. Do you remember the PSA he did in 1985 or 86 before he passed? He goes,
yep.
By the time you see this, I'll be dead. I mean, but you can't take away 1 million cigarettes you smoked over 30 years.
And I see PSAs today talking about smoking, and it'll have somebody talking about it, and then at the bottom they said she died 2 years ago.
Yeah, it was. And who's to say if that would have gone?
I have never smoked before. I've just never really wanted to.
I smoked, I don't know if I've told you this many times, but I smoked one cigarette in 6th grade, inhaled it, didn't cough once, said, yeah, I got this. 30 minutes later, I was sick as a dog, and Dad knew. He knew that I'd smoked because he could smell it on me. And he didn't discipline me, which surprised me, but he just says, that feeling you got, and I never, ever smoked a cigarette again. But it was the best thing for me because, you've always heard stories like your grandmother, somebody, it's candy cigarettes. Well, here, eat them. But if it makes you sick and it keeps you from a lifelong addiction, and so be it.
It's the same way with booze. You don't drink.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and the thing is with him doing that with Gig Young, and how ironic it is. Because what he said was one thing, but he hadn't changed his ways because he was out there hot dogging around. Now, sometimes you can get in a horrific crash and you walk away and go, "Oh my God, I've learned my lesson." But some of us don't get that second chance because of what happened. But everything happens for a reason, and I mean, he's iconic now because, and nothing, you didn't see him fade away. It's like with Marlon Brando when he started gaining weight, and in all of his family issues, and him just shutting down production because he felt like it, and it was just it was just one of those things. But he definitely left his mark on not on Hollywood, but I think in life in general.
And I think years on down the road they'll be talking about James Dean.
Yeah, because, like I said, 68 years later, you did 3 movies. Pretty good bit of TV work, but nobody knows really much about that.
And the Eagles did a song called James Dean.
Right. It's I'd heard the song many a times. It was the 20th anniversary of his death when they released that song in 1975. But it took me, I guess, maybe 100 times hearing this, like, oh, now I get it. But there's a great lyric in there where it says, "Along came a spider, picked up a rider, headed down the road to eternity, James Dean." I was like, what does that even mean? But the poor spider he was driving, he had a rider with him, which was his mechanic, and then he ended up killing himself, unfortunately. But now he's ever eternal young. I mean, he never aged. He didn't get heavy. He didn't lose his hair. He didn't get old. Same thing with Elvis. I mean, Elvis was in his 40s, but, you couldn't look at Johnny Cash the way he went out. And it was because of his lifestyle. But if you live long enough, life does get you, because, I mean, look at Clint Eastwood. I think it's amazing Clint Eastwood was 93, but, I mean, he's old. And he took care of himself.
He took care of himself.
He didn't smoke. He didn't drink. He watched his weight. He worked out.
He didn't smoke even in his spaghetti westerns when
Yeah.
we had the cigar. He didn't inhale it. It was a special kind of cigar. It wasn't real tobacco.
Well, they say how he just hated it. Well, like, and I just recently binge watched it, but Al and I are both big fans of Cillian Murphy, who Peaky Blinders, and also the Atom Bomb movie.
Oppenheimer,
yeah. Well, in Peaky Blinders, he smokes like a fiend, but they're fake cigarettes.
They're fake cigarettes.
So it looks real, and you can inhale it and all that. Because back in the day, if somebody didn't smoke, you could see them, and you could tell they weren't really smoking it. But that's the whole thing with that. But of course, with James Dean, whenever he'd smoke on screen, it was real because he was a big smoker, and it just plays heck on your lung and your lifestyle.
I heard Clint Eastwood say one time he wasn't a fan of horses. He didn't like them. I mean, he didn't hate horses, but he didn't feel comfortable riding them.
And the thing is,
and he
looked so he
looked so great in it,
But then it was like smoking. He hated smoking, but it looked real.
Right.
When he'd smoke it and chomp on everything, it's just
they weren't real cigars.
Yeah. So. Yeah, because but Elvis actually enjoyed cigars. He liked the little cigarellos. Michael Jordan's another cigar aficionado. Yeah. With that, but I mean, not that I'm advocating them, but smoking's just not good. But that wasn't the meaning of the podcast. But I do know his favorite brand of cigarettes was Chesterfield's. James Dean. I don't even know if they still make those or not.
Oh, they do. But back in the day, they had the cigarette in their T-shirt. Mm-hmm.
He might have been the one that did that, because I think he would have. I think he probably would have really enjoyed the 50s retro that came out with like Sha Na Na and the Lords of Flatbush and Happy Days. I think he would have gotten a kick out of that.
Oh, he would have.
With that, because a lot of times things just come in circles. what was old or not, now comes back to being cool again, for that. But to me, he's always been cool in my book.
Well, we've gone almost 90 minutes, and it's been a fun thing. And, today was the day that James Dean left us back in 1955.
Mm-hmm.
And so we didn't cover everything, but, we got a good part of his life, and I got more of an insight into him because of you.
Yeah, well, you always run very good shows, Al. I appreciate it. You're like the Johnny Carson of podcasts. I mean, minus the $20 million paycheck.
That's right.
But thank you for having me on the show. I really do appreciate it. But and I hope everybody who was listening or is listening appreciate it as well. But James Dean is gone, but definitely not forgotten, and he's definitely a part of my life even to this day. So, but thank you so much, Al. I appreciate you.
Thanks for being here.
Allowing me
it's been
on
fun, and we'll do it again real soon.
Absolutely. You take care.
Okay, bye.
All right.